Hey, beer appreciators, Swaddy Krab. Welcome to Beer Times Story, the platform where beer and brewing knowledge is shared. For today's session, we will have some good burps about the harsh story of English Mile. Yes, English Mile, one of my favorite styles of beer from the UK. And from our modern perspective, it is pretty common to view that English Mile is a sessionable beer. Its ABV stay at the lower end of the spectrum, somewhere about 3 to 4%. Its color is in the range of somewhat, brown to dark shade, but don't let this quality, fool you, because the well brewed one comes with a very flavorful taste, from bready, toasty, nutty kind of maltiness to hints of coffee and roasty notes that harmonize well with, the tones of licorice, raisiness, and fruitiness in the background. I'm thirsty. Okay, now from the historical point of view, though, if we take a time machine, if we took a time machine to the 18th or 19th century, handed our English mile to the folks that live in that time, let them taste it, and tell them that this is mile ale, then they probably can't, process what we just said. This is because it is not how mile was represented then. In fact, there's nothing mild about it at all, and the history of mile is quite harsh. So, seems like there are obviously, missing links here between our and their mile, and I hope that this session will help connect those dots. To accomplish this, we will need help from two good hands. One is from a historian, and another is from a beer fanatic, which our guest speaker happens to possess both qualities. And here's is a snapshot of his background. Some way and somehow, he got involved in the business of writing about travel guides, beers, and pubs in the late 90s. Slowly, it got him and led him to become interested in the historical side of beer, particularly, the British one, which he further pursued his curiosity, digging up information from original sources, started putting them together in the place that he found the blog, and shared those to the people who share the same curiosity with him. The blog he found was called "Shut Up About Barclay Perkins" in 2007. Now, apart from the blog, he also published, several books about beer since 2009, and some of the highlights are, the Homebrewer Guide to Vintage Beer, Stout, London Dark Secret, and of course, Mile. To top things out, his work are not only limited, in the letter formats. With his expertise in the brewing history, he has also been involved in, many collaboration brew projects with great breweries all over the places that attempt to recreate the historical style of beers. Like the 19th century Pale Ale project with Goose Island Brewing Company in Chicago, and the mid 20th century Porter with Jester King Brewery in Texas, United States. So please welcome our guest speaker, Ron Pattinson.
Hello.
Hello, Ron. Welcome to the platform. Appreciate it that
Yeah,
you
my pleasure.
yeah, can join us here. So, what's happening at your site, man?
Well, it's a nice sunny day for once. Not very much. It was a holiday here yesterday, so it was
Oh,
King's Day. So just doing a bit of writing this morning.
oh, okay. So, are you talking live from Amsterdam? Am I getting this
Yes,
right?
yes. I'm in Amsterdam. Yeah.
Okay, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Perfect. So, I see that at the beginning of this year, you just released the latest book called Cake,
Yeah.
and just wonder, like you mentioned, do some writing a little bit. Are you currently working on the newer one of some sort?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, I'm always working on at least one book. Um, so yeah, the main thing I'm working on now is British beer 1880 to 1914.
Okay,
So
okay,
I'm about halfway through that.
right. And when can we expect it to be released to the market?
Um, well, yeah, it depends how much traveling I do because that sort of disrupts it quite a bit. But
Mhm.
probably later this year.
Excellent. Okay, Ron. I mean, I would like to warm things up a bit, before we hit the main road for today's session and ask you, a couple of questions first.
Okay.
The first one is about your blog. Shut up about Barclay Perkins. See, like I do know that Barclay Perkins was a breweries in London that can be dated back in like 18th or to the late 20th century. But what about the word "shut up"? Like, what is it all about?
Oh, this is just what my kids used to say to me because I kept going on about Barclay Perkins, and they got really fed up with it. And it's one of the reasons I wrote the blog, so I could write about this stuff, and people wouldn't just keep telling me to shut up.
Well, so I mean that's kind of benefit more folks than you expect, I believe.
Yeah.
So. Okay, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful story. All right, the next question is about those historical collaboration brew projects that you involved in. I'm curious about the taste of those beer that were revived. Ron, can you briefly touch on some of the outstanding one that you can recall from your memory?
Well, the stock pale ale I did with Goose Island, that was really a revelation. That the thing I liked about that beer was that it didn't really taste like anything that's available commercially today. The only beer that it tastes even vaguely like is Orval,
Oh,
because of the Brettanomyces.
right.
Um,
Interesting.
well, I mean, I've been saying to people for years that I think Orval's an attempt at a UK type pale ale,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because the proper ones always had Brettanomyces in them. So yeah, that was a really interesting beer because it was bone dry, all Goldings hops,
Mm-hmm.
and an awful lot of them. So a really, really nice firm bitterness that it had, and then underneath all this sort of like funky stuff going on. Very interesting beer. And it was worth it because I had no idea what that was going to taste like, that beer. And so it was more than just an academic exercise. It was actually, this tells me this is probably what the beer that they were selling in India tasted like. Something
Mm-hmm.
like this, not like modern IPAs at all.
Got you. And how long did the beer, was aged for again? Sorry, the stock ale.
The one we did for 11 months in oak with Brettanomyces, and then
Mm-hmm.
bottled it. The original ones that were sent to India would have had about a year in the brewery maturing, and then a few more months on the boat to India. So I mean, the original IPAs, they would have been something like, I don't know, 18 months old before they were drunk when they were the ones that were shipped to India. Then the pale
Right.
ales that were drunk in the UK, the IPAs, they would have been about a year old.
In the
So
warehouse, right? Yeah.
So no, not in a warehouse, just outside in the brewery yard, just
Ah,
completely
okay.
exposed to the elements. So it's
Mm.
really crazy. It's incredibly counterintuitive the way they handle the beer. It's
Yeah. Pretty interesting too.
yeah.
Right. And
Um,
sorry, please go ahead.
and then the another interesting one was which was another beer from the same brewery, from Truman's originally, which was a blended porter, so a
Mm.
blend of stock and running porter, which was
Right.
interesting, and to see the difference between the beers and how what difference the blend made. Because one of the nice things was, before that was released, well, at the release party, they got the
Mhm.
two beers unaged, and it was really interesting to try the older beer and the young beer, and
Mhm.
then the combination of the two, and the blend was definitely better than either of the individual beers, which was
Mm.
interesting. Which is, I suppose, why they were doing it in the first place. So you got some of the age character, so from the
Mhm.
Brettanomyces, but then you got
Mhm.
fresh character as well from the young beer, and so you were
Mhm.
getting something that you couldn't possibly have got from a single brew, because you got
Wow.
a combination of aged flavors and young flavors, and so there's no way
Mhm.
you could get that in a single beer. Um, it makes me realize that people have completely forgotten about blending, other than in Belgium, and it used to be a
Right.
big thing
Right.
in Britain.
Right. Right. Pretty cool. I mean, like because it's kind of the project that brings those records, the letters, the recipe, historical one, and just translate them to the glass, and then you can just interpret it in a different context and kind of realize what those people back in the day kind of drink.
Yeah, you can also you also can see the point of why they were doing it. I mean, I could theoretically say, okay, it's because you're going to get the combination of these flavors, but then when you've
Right.
actually tasted it, you can see what the actual real result is, and you can say, yeah, well, there was a point in doing this. So
That's great. I mean, personally, I do really want to have a chance to try one, or at least brew one, but we'll see in the future if that can happen.
yeah, well, there's a lot of old recipes out there. I don't know how many I've published. It must be at least 3,000 or 4,000.
Yeah, I've seen some, and probably that's gonna be the baseline where if this project's gonna happen, that's probably be the baseline that I will just use it as a reference.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's lots of really interesting old beers. I mean, yeah. I mean, my personal favorite for UK beers is actually the period just before World War One. So around 1900 to 1914 I think was probably the best period for British brewing. But yeah, I mean, it's different in every period, but that's where you've still got the beers at the proper strength, and it's before they start really reducing the strength of British beer. This is the thing that's really odd, that before World War One, British beer was stronger than the beer everywhere else. And it's strange that it's become the opposite, that British beer is now weaker than everyone else's, but it used to be the case that it was stronger, and in a lot of cases, very much stronger.
All right. I think our engine is pretty, warm up in a good cadence, and we are ready to learn about the harsh history of English mile. So, okay, Ron, I think that first it is probably best to understand the context of beer as well as ale from the historical point of view. Say, back in the day, around 17th centuries, like weren't these two things the same, or are they different?
No, beer and ale were very different things, really, right up until the 19th century. So, I mean, if you go back before 1600, then ale was completely unhopped. So it'd sometimes have other flavorings put in it, but it was unhopped. Then after 1600, they start hopping at ale as well as beer, but at a much lower rate. So it's a very small amount of hops that's going into ale. It's maybe like a fifth of the amount that's going into beer. So it's a really big difference. And that was the difference between ale and beer originally. Beer being the stuff that had hops in it, and ale being the original drink from Britain. Beer being something that was imported, which came over with immigrants from the Low Countries in the 1400s, I think. Or late 1300s, somewhere around then. So in the Middle Ages, and that it's a very big difference between the two, in the fact that they're completely different sets of brewers that are brewing them. You don't have brewers brewing ale and beer; they'll brew one or the other.
Wow!
And one of the reasons for this is that the barrel sizes were different. So beer came in 36-gallon barrels, and ale came in 32-gallon barrels.
Okay.
So if you had produced beer and ale, you would have needed to have two sets of barrels, one for beer and one for ale. So obviously that's quite a big practical difficulty. And so you see the big porter brewers, who were all beer brewers, because porter was a beer, it's brown beer basically. They only started brewing ale in the 1830s, and that was because the law had changed. So they standardized on the barrel sizes in the 1820s, and so after that, you see the differentiation between ale and beer really pretty well fades away. But up until then, it was quite a strong difference. It was like two completely separate businesses, really.
Gotcha. So so that difference in barrel size was according to the law, right?
Yeah, that's the law. So these were the official measures. So there weren't standard fluid measures in Britain until the 1820s. You had wine gallons, you had beer gallons, you had all these different sizes depending on what the liquid was, and then they decided to standardize it all in the 1820s. And that's why the American fluid measures are not the same as the imperial ones. It's because
Mhm.
America became independent before they were standardized in the UK.
Mm. Yeah.
So it's like older ones that they're still using in the States.
Mhm. Mhm. Got you. And mainly the main or the major difference between ale and beer is the hopping rate.
Yeah,
Besides that, it is the alcoholic beverage has been made with malted barley or some sort of grains and
yeah,
fermented fruit, right? So it can has, I mean, like both of them can come with varieties of colors.
yeah. So they all you had the three base malts. We're talking 18th century here. You had three base
Mhm.
malts. You had pale,
Mhm.
amber, and brown malt. And so
Okay.
you had pale ale, brown ale, amber ale, and pale beer, brown
Brown
beer,
beer.
and amber beer. And brown beer, that's what becomes porter and stout.
Okay. Okay. All right. Now things seems to, coming together. So then as a follow-up question, where did the term mile fit into that picture in those particular time?
Right. So the other classification, the way that 18th century beer is classified is firstly it's by whether it's ale or beer, secondly by the base grain,
Hmm.
and then by whether it's aged or not.
All right.
So anything that's not going to be aged, that's called mild.
Hmm.
And anything aged in the 18th century, they would call it stale, which didn't mean what it currently means in English, like sort of like old in a bad way. It just meant
Right.
aged in
Age.
the 18th century.
Hmm.
Um, and so mild ale in that is just any ale, so any lightly hopped drink, which is sold young. So it could be any strength, it could be any color. It's
Hmm.
just ale that's served young, ale that's yeah that's served without any aging on it. Because they did also age some of the ales, which is surprising, seeing as they're not very heavily hopped. But they did age some, and they came in
Hmm.
all sorts of strengths. So both beer and ale came from like table beer strength up to
Hmm.
11% alcohol. So the whole range, quite a wide range of alcohol
Yeah.
strengths that are brewed in. So it's really mild ale is really a very vague term in the 18th century. It's not really pinning it down to any very specific type of beer,
Hmm.
because I say it could have been any color. It
Gotcha.
could have been aged. It couldn't have been aged, but it could be, a beer. It could be an ale. Only thing is that it's young. Um, and then this changes in the early 19th century. Then you see that it starts to become a specific thing, mild ale, and that's when you start seeing it mostly being referred to by a number of X's. So if
Hmm.
you go back into the 19th century, they didn't do that then. But this is when you get the system of X's. So the weakest mild is single X, and then it'll go up to 4X, which will be the strongest one. And this seems to be when that came in as a system. Though you do still get some breweries who instead would give like do it like in Scotland. So it'd be a shilling price. So that'd be the the wholesale price of the beer. Um, so you had a few British breweries that did that, a few English ones who did that in the early 19th century. But by the time you get around to about 1830, pretty much everyone's just using X's for their mild ales.
Hmm.
And
So yeah, sorry.
and so these would be very simple beers. That if you're looking at these early 19th century mild ales, they're pale malt, hops, and that's it. So it'll just be, they're quite often smash beers, just so single type of base malt and then one type of hops, and that's it. And what you
Mhm.
also see happen at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century, is that the hopping rate of ales goes up. So by the time you through into the middle of the 19th century, there's no real differentiation between beer and ale in terms of the hopping rate anymore.
Mhm.
It's then just that certain styles are more heavily hopped. So an imperial stout's going to have a lot of hops in it, and an IPA is going to have a lot of hops in it. Mild ale, not so many. But I mean, you can still come across some quite surprising ones. I mean, probably my favourite beer of all time, and definitely the favourite beer that I've had brewed by anyone, was this 4X mild ale from I think 1832. from a
Okay.
London brewer that Pretty Things brewed. And that was a smash beer. It was just mild malt and whole leaf Goldings. And that was incredible. But that came out to 10.5% ABV
Oh,
and about 120 IBU, something like
calculated.
that.
But yeah,
Well,
but it's
that's
still.
calculated IBUs,
Yeah,
but so
but
not
it's still.
actual measured ones. But still, it was
Real
a
beer.
very hoppy beer. So
Yeah.
had nothing at all in common with what people would think of with as a modern mild, because it was way
Mhm.
too strong and it was the wrong color and way too hoppy. So it hadn't. I mean, another great thing I did once, again with Pretty Things in Boston, we
Mhm.
did 2 Barclay Perkins mild ale. So it was Barclay Perkins X Ale, their standard base level mild, and we did the
Mhm.
1837 recipe and the 1945 recipe. So this is the same brand of beer, but
Right.
about 100 years apart. And
Mhm.
the one from the 1830s was 7.5% ABV, I don't know, about 70 or 80 IBUs, pale, really nice beer. The
Mhm.
1945 one was dark, 2.7% ABV, hardly hopped at all. The beers had absolutely nothing in common with each other apart from the name. And
Mhm.
this was just
Mhm.
a beer that's been continually brewed all that period. It's not that
From
they
the
suddenly
same brewery
revived
too,
it. There's something
right?
different. Yeah, it's the same brewery, same brand. It's just changed over the years. So it's been step changes. So I mean, the first
Mhm.
change you get is the strengths start going down in the 19th century. Then you
Right.
start then you start having the color change. This is one of the things that's still a mystery to me. I keep finding out more little bits about it now and again, but it's still quite frustrating, which is when
Yeah.
dark mild appears.
Mhm.
So for most of the 19th century, mild ales are very simple. They're just base pale malt. They've got no other malts in them, and they're just pale in color.
Mhm.
Then what you have starting about 1880, and I think starting in the south of England rather than elsewhere, you start getting the beers going darker. And so the milds at first they go between about 1880 and 1900, they go like
Mhm.
semi-dark.
Mhm.
So that this would be like about 10 SRM,
Right.
maybe a bit more. And then they start getting darker and darker and darker in the 20th century. But it's an uneven process. It doesn't happen everywhere at the same rate. It seems to be
Right.
London and the southeast it happens first. So by the time you get to World War II, London milds are generally pretty dark, even though there's still amber versions around, but they're
Mhm.
mostly fairly dark. Whereas in the rest of the country, some places they're still pale mild, some places you've still got light and dark milds, um, and some they haven't got any darker than amber. And so the process of going completely dark, well, never really totally happens, but mild
Gradually.
becoming
Mhm.
generally dark is a post World War II thing, really, being
Mm.
a dark brown color. They've been dark enough to differentiate from from bitter for the whole of the 20th century. It's just that they've become really dark after World War II. Um, and it's interesting to see how regional it is. I'm lucky that I've got quite a lot of details of beers from the 1950s,
Right.
which is why I can break it down regionally and see in some areas the milds are noticeably paler. Um, you can see in London that they're sweeter than elsewhere because the final gravity is higher.
Mhm. Mhm.
Some places like the West Midlands, they're stronger. They're stronger and generally drier, the beers. So there's still a lot of regional variation, even in the 1950s and 60s, and
Mm.
in the nature of mild. It was never anything one consistent thing over the whole country.
Interesting. I mean, like this phenomenon of development or evolution of mile is pretty wild, It's like because like what you mentioned in the beginning of 19th centuries, it is a simple smash beer,
Yeah,
100% pale malt, and they are brewed extremely. I mean, from modern day perspective, it's like high gravity, 1070, 1010, up north
yeah,
there, right?
yeah.
And if I get this right, around that time, the new kids on the block was introduced, which is the pale ale beer, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you get well,
Kind of.
well, you get the new type of pale ale. Pale ale it existed since I think at least 1600.
Okay.
But 18th century pale ale, which was something that was quite popular in London, is completely different from the modern concept of pale ale.
Right.
So these were ales in the sense of being very lightly hopped. So they would have been totally different from IPA. So the second generation of pale ales, you get the stuff that's basically based around IPA. They're very different. They're beers that are really heavily hopped, even the domestic versions. I mean, like crazy amounts of hopping. You're looking at, 5 pounds a barrel. So an awful lot of hops. And yeah, but you have to realize that pale ale and the new pale ales were very, very much a minority drink right up until the 20th century. So if you're looking at the 19th century, then it's the better off who are drinking pale ales. It's not your average miner down the pub. He wouldn't be drinking pale ale. He'd be drinking mild, or they would have been drinking porter at one point, and then in the 1830s and 1840s that have moved on to mild. And so mild is the dominant style in the UK from about 1840 to 1960. So
Wow.
quite a long period. And the dominance of bitter and pale ale in the UK was very short. It's from about 1962 to 1982. So it's like maybe 20 years or so was the most popular style. So historically seen, actually quite brief.
So then, this is probably a sidetrack a little bit here, but say, in the 19th centuries or the beginning of 20th centuries, what is the key difference between mild ale and pale ale?
Well, in the start in the 19th century, the main difference would be the rate of hopping.
Okay.
And the rate of attenuation, because you're talking most of the time up until the 1850s or 1860s, pale ales are mostly stock beers, which means they're aged. So they would have had a Britannomyces character, and also they would have been very highly attenuated. I mean, I've seen analyses of Bass IPA that have a starting gravity of 1065 and a finishing gravity of 1002. So they're not far off 100% apparent attenuation. And I don't know why it took me so long to twig that could only be possible if you've got Britannomyces in the mix. Otherwise, you're never going to get that degree of attenuation. So that's a big difference. So you haven't got the age character in mild ales. You haven't got the really excessive levels of hopping. So and yeah, they tend to be sweeter, just they have more body than milds because they'd have a higher finishing gravity. But I mean that changes when, I mean, it changes in from both ends. So what you see, I think it starts about the 1840s. You get the first light bitter ales. So this is when you get pale ales introduced, which aren't stock beers, which are sold. They're called running beers. So these are effective. And you'll see one of the most common ones was beers of this type was AK, and you'll see that described sometimes as a mild bitter, because it was using mild in the sense of unaged. So I mean, to modern ears, it sounds nonsensical to say mild bitter. It's two different things, but it does make sense if you're just using mild in the sense of unaged. Then it makes perfect sense to say, well, you can have a bitter that isn't an aged one. And so what you have is, this is where you see the difference between mild and bitter narrowing to some extent in the late 19th century, because these light bitter ales aren't as heavily hopped as the stock ones, even though they are more heavily hopped than the milds, and they don't have any age character. So that's getting more like milds. But then at the same time, you've got mild becoming darker, so they can differentiate them from bitters on colour. And why mild went dark, I've only two explanations for why it went dark.
Okay, please.
One being a very cynical one. One explanation is it's just that people associated darker beers with being stronger. So if you made your mild a bit darker, people might think it was stronger than it really was. And the other one is to do with the decline of porter. The landlords needed a cheap beer dark beer to pour all the slops into, and so they needed mild to be dark, so you couldn't tell what had been put into it. That's the cynical explanation.
But at least,
because I'm sure that it used to be porter where all the slops went, and it was definitely later on the mild where the slops went. So it wouldn't surprise me if the two were connected, but that's something you're never going to be able to prove. It's something that's completely impossible to really find anything firm behind it, because it's something that just happened organically.
Yeah.
It wasn't like someone decided, oh, I'm going to make dark mild now. It's just something that happened gradually over time. So it's not like it was organized or anything. So it's an odd process. And yeah, I keep looking into it and I keep finding out little bits more about it. But it's still quite difficult.
True. I mean, hopefully you will find the big piece of information that kind of better help explain this phenomenon soon.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways I can tell when where it's flopped from being mild, being standard pale, to being standard dark is in brewery price lists. So you'll see that at a certain, when you go back to the early ones, at a certain point they'll start calling some of their milds dark. But then when you get through the 20th century, it's the other way round. That sometimes it's only when it's a light mild that they'll say it's a light mild, and if it's a dark mild, it won't say anything, because the assumption is that mild's dark. And so you can see there's a change somewhere between 1880 and, like, say, 1930 as to what people mostly expected mild to be.
And we can see here from this photo on the right that when we hit the kind of 20th centuries, they use a bit more of those color malt into the brew of the mild, so you get a little bit more darker shade of kind of pale color. And then later on they introduce those kind of brown malt, chocolate malt, dark malt, so it's become more dark color, like what you mentioned, around World War I, right?
Well, I think one of the things that might contribute to the change in color is it's to do with the change in the rules in 1880.
Okay.
When they basically did away with the Reinheitsgebot in Britain.
Is that the Free Mash-Tun Act?
Yeah, Free Mash-Tun Act. Yeah.
Okay.
Where people start using a lot more sugar. And the thing is that with the introduction of sugar, you see beers coming in intermediate shades. So before, mostly what you get is beers are either pale or they're dark, like porter and stout. And I think because with sugar, you've got more control over the exact shade of the beer, and so you've got a finer control over what color you have a beer. So you can make a beer that's sort of like semi-dark quite easily, or any shade that you want, and that seems to influence the color of mild. So first it's crystal malt that first gets used, because crystal malt was really developed for mild originally. That was the idea, to give it sort of a sweet, luscious taste to the beer. So it was mild it was originally designed for. So you get that coming in the late 19th century, but also sugar at the same time. So you start seeing the numbered inverts come in the latter years of the 19th century. So the number 1, 2, and 3, and that's when you see number 3 sugar start turning up in mild. So I was just going through some stuff from Tetley's yesterday, and some of their records from 1904, I think it was, and you could see there that they're brewing, and this is interesting. So they're milds. They've got ones that they've got X pale, and they've also just got X.
Okay.
So this is telling you that at this point, their mild was normally dark, because they're saying it's when it's pale, it's something special. And so they're using number 3 to color up the dark version. It doesn't have any dark malt in it. All it has is mild malt, pale malt, number 3 invert, sugar, and caramel, which is rather typical of what you find in mild ales, that they tend not to have much in the way of dark malt. and mostly get their color from sugar. So it's quite common for a mild to not have anything darker than crystal malt in it, and then the majority of the color coming from other stuff.
Got you. This is very interesting.
But then again, but it varies greatly from brewery to brewery, because you'll have other ones who'll put stuff like brown malt in. So some of the London brewers, I think because they had brown malt hanging around because they always used it in their stout, their porter and stout. So they sometimes put brown malt into their mild, which I think is probably interesting. I don't know if I've ever had a mild with brown malt in it. So be an interesting thing to try, because I think it probably fit quite nicely. Right. So I mean, you also see some have black malt in occasionally, very small quantities of black malt, just purely for color. But yeah, I mean, it tends to vary quite a bit, the grists, and vary on location. But I mean, another thing that I have to say that's very common after 1880 is that pretty much all of the milds would have 5 to 10% flake maize in them.
Okay.
So generally they'd be about 75% malt, and then 25% split between some sort of adjunct, but that'd normally be flake maize and sugar.
Interesting.
But then you get different things. So then during World War II, because maize had to be imported, then that disappears. And what they have instead is they have flake barley as an adjunct.
Oh, okay.
So weirdly enough, during World War II, they had plenty of barley in the UK. What they didn't have was enough people to malt it. And so they had problems in the malting industry. And so what they did, they said, okay, well, brewers just have to use 15% flake barley in their beers, just purely because we haven't got enough people to malt the barley.
Okay.
And then after World War II, when that rule didn't apply anymore, then they all swapped back to flake maize immediately, and no one's using flake barley anymore.
Okay, it seems like flake maize is like their preferred grits of choice somehow.
Yeah, the flake maize was very, very popular in the initial years after the Free Mashton Act. What you see is that initially a lot of people used flaked rice rather than flake maize, and looking through the technical specs, I can see why, because you get better extract from rice than from any other grain. So it's even better than barley for the extract it gives you.
Right. So more bang for the buck, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, but this is why people stopped using it. You get better extract from it, but rice is more expensive.
Okay, that's a trade-off.
Yeah. So you see, most people go over to maize because basically, I think for economic reasons, that even though technically rice is better, it's more expensive because most of it's used for human food, whereas stuff like maize, a lot of it's grown as animal feed. It's not like rice, which is, I don't think people feed rice to animals, do they?
No, it's just feed to us.
Yeah.
Okay. Ron, can you briefly touch on the Free Mashton Act, like just for those who have no clue about it?
Okay, well, the Free Mashton Act, it's like one of the most important pieces of legislation in British brewing. Before the Free Mashton Act, what you had was effectively a Reinheitsgebot in the UK. The only difference being that after 1847, sugar was allowed. But apart from that, it's just all the beers have to be pure malt. 1880, there's a huge change. They say, okay, now brewers can use anything they want in their beer as long as it's food safe.
Okay.
So you use what you like. And then, of course, immediately what brewers do is start using unmalted adjuncts because it saves them a lot of money. And they did that and basically stuck with it, though there were brewers who didn't. Whitbread didn't use any adjuncts. They only used malt and sugar. They're unusual in the big breweries in that. But we occasionally come across brewers who are all malt, but in general, pretty much everyone was using at least sugar, and almost everyone was using some sort of adjunct as well. So I mean, it really, I mean, and one of the other things was the Free Mashington Act also changed the taxation system. So this is when you went to the system where it's based on the gravity of the beer before fermentation. That's the basis for the tax. And whereas before, between 1830 and 1880, it had been purely a tax on malt. There'd been no tax on beer at all between 1830 and 1880. It was only malt that was taxed. Well, for some of the period, hops were taxed as well, but for most of it, it was only malt. And so there was a big change in the system of taxation. So you were directly, I mean, you were effectively being charged tax on the strength of the beer. It wasn't exactly the same because it wasn't the ABV, it was the gravity, but it was basically you're being taxed on the strength. So yeah, I mean, and that tended to have an effect of
the creativity of brewers.
Yeah, well, it's a discouragement to aging if you've got that system of taxation, because you're paying the tax right up front. So yeah, if you start aging a beer, then you've already paid the tax on it, and when the tax and as time goes on, the tax starts getting to be a considerable part of the chunk of the retail price. I mean, once you get from World War I onwards, basically the tax is about 50% of the retail price of beer.
Oh, okay.
So
it's huge. Yeah,
it's a really big chunk of the wholesale price. So yeah, half of what you're paying for beer is just pure tax. Yeah, I mean, this all comes about in World War I when you have when it goes crazy. So I mean, the tax on beer goes up from I mean, it's a complicated way it was done. The tax rate was per this thing called a standard barrel. So a standard barrel was 36 gallons of a beer of a gravity of 1055.
Okay.
So which before World War I was about average strength. So it means that bulk barrels and standard barrels are about the same for that period, but obviously very different when beer got weaker. Yeah, so where was I going with this? Oh yeah, it was to tell you about the tax. So the tax on beer was 7 shillings and 9 pence per standard barrel in 1914, which is old money, which in modern money that's about 37.5 pence.
37.5 pounds. Okay.
Pence.
Okay, pence. Okay.
Yeah. At the end of the war, it was £4.
From pence, now we're talking about pounds.
Yeah. So it gone from 37.5 pence to £4.
Okay.
So that's quite a big increase.
Yeah. That's a big leap of jump.
Yeah, and it had a big effect on mild in particular, because mild was the most popular beer. That tended to get its strength cut the most. And modern mild only really dates from the 1930s. And so what you have after World War One, before World War One, mild, well, London mild had been 5 and a bit percent. After the war, it's about 4.2, something like that, the full strength mild. Then what you have in 1931, in a reaction to the Wall Street crash, you have the British government very unwisely put up the tax on beer by 20%. And what all the brewers did was they just cut the beer strengths so that the beer stayed the same price. Right. So even though the tax rate had gone up, the amount of money they took in went down, but it also dropped the strength of mild. So this is when mild went to being generally only about 3.5% ABV. And when they rolled the tax increase back a couple of years later, the strength didn't really go up again.
It just stayed that way.
Brewers just cut the price by a penny.
Okay.
Because people have got used to beer of that strength.
So was that one of the key factors that kind of lead to the decline of mild?
Um, Long term, probably yes, but it's a whole load of complex things. It's also to do with social change after World War II,
Hmm.
um, and people being better off. And one of the expressions of being better off was moving up to bitter rather than mild.
Mm. Okay.
And what you also have, and you can see from the way the Miles percentage of sales declines, that it's basically going down with the natural death rate.
Okay.
So what's really happening is after a certain point, there's not really any new drinkers coming in. And so you've only
Okay.
got the existing drinkers, and as these die off, then the sales go down.
Okay.
And
That
so
explains.
that's what's happened with mild. Um,
Mhm.
so and yeah, it was a lot to do with, especially in the post-war world, about people not want, people don't want to be sat drinking the beer that their granddad's drinking. There's a lot of
Okay.
that involved in it.
Hmm.
It's why some other styles became incredibly unfashionable, like milk stout. That was the beer
Hmm.
your granny would be drinking, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
So that's not what an 18-year-old wants to drink, is it?
Hmm.
What your granny's drinking? No. And so you've seen a lot of that in terms of beer styles declining post-war. It's just
Hmm.
that them becoming associated with an older age group, and it's just certainly putting young people off.
Hmm.
Interestingly, I've heard this was something that was happening with Guinness as well in
Oh.
Ireland. And someone was saying to me that it's completely changed, that now young people are drinking Guinness again in
Yes.
Ireland because it's become
Yeah.
fashionable. And so what you see is that people who are drinking Guinness are generally either over 50 or under 30.
And then
And the
there's a
group
gap there.
30 and the group 30 to 50 are all drinking lager.
It's pretty amazed to see how social can, influence the, I would say trend, but the
Oh, but
behavior. Yeah.
beer is completely influenced by society around it. Uh,
Hmm.
Probably way more so than a lot of things, partly because beer is much more regulated as an alcoholic product. So it's not like
Yeah.
potatoes. Potatoes don't have huge numbers of rules governing how they're produced and consumed,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
whereas
Yeah.
beer does. And that, because those rules are different in every country, that's why beer styles tend to change when you put them somewhere else. A
Hmm.
good example is the United States. Why are all the beers so strong in the US?
Tax.
You know why?
Taxation wise.
It's because of the tax system, because they have a flat rate
Yeah.
tax. And
Yeah.
so you're paying the same tax on a 10% imperial stout as you're on a 3% mild. So that's an
Hmm.
incredible disincentive to brew the weaker beer, because people are going to say, why am I having to pay the same price for this something that's a third the strength?
Yeah, that's true. Hmm.
And so it's completely distorted the American beer market. I don't know if people don't realize it that much, but I'm sure it has. And so that
Hmm.
so beer is incredibly sensitive to the society around it, and everything else that's going on influences what happens with beer. And it's not
Hmm.
like people are sat there and saying, "Oh yes, I think this is the way we want to take pale ale, and let's make IPA a bit more hoppy." It's not like there's a committee behind it anywhere.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
are just things that happen organically, um,
Mhm.
which makes them all the more interesting, because there isn't anything controlling it. It is just something spontaneous, and to some extent, these things are random. The things with beer styles, I think, is to some extent random. It's not to do with anything intrinsic in that type of beer itself. It's just
Mhm.
that it has a certain image at a certain moment that attracts certain groups of people, and that will make it incredibly popular.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
keep saying to people, pills at a certain point is going to go incredibly out of fashion, and no one's going to want to drink it. I'm surprised it's had as long a run as it has.
Mhm. 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 Understood. This is fascinating. All right. I mean, we've learned a lot, so far, the beginning of, let's say, beginning of Mile, how it changed and morphed over time, how taxation, socials, war uh, plays in the role of the way the beer evolved. And at this moment, we are at the tail end of the session. And I think for this landing part, it is a good idea to to ask you to help to translate some of the, because like when I look into the historical mile recipe or for the beer bottles on the label, it has those kind of nomenclatures that's pretty unique to them. Like you mentioned X before, but there are some
Yeah.
other things like K, I don't know, PA, BA, KK. Can you help talk about it? I'll put some photo on the screen and then let's see if
Oh,
everyone
yeah.
can.
Okay. Well, yeah. Now, this is something general.
Mm-hmm.
X is mostly used for mild, but it's used for
Okay.
other things as well. So you see people use it for, well, I've seen it in Ireland used for porter and stout. So I think it's like Guinness Extra Stout is 2X, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so generally it's an indication of strength. So the more X's, the stronger it is.
Okay.
Mostly for mild, but also used for other styles. K is generally used for keeping beers, so for stock ales. Also used for bitter as well,
Okay.
as in AK, which is one that took me a long while to work out. PA just means pale ale. Yeah, BA bitter ale. You see BB bitter beer as well. That's reasonably
BB. Okay.
common. Yeah.
What
You
about
also
XL?
sorry,
What
X,
about XL?
XL. Well,
Yeah.
normally L, when you see that, means London, so it'll mean a version for
Okay.
London, which normally
Hmm.
means just stronger than other ones. What you also see
Ah.
is ones with a C, C standing for country, meaning
Hmm.
everywhere except London.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
That's just the way it goes. But yeah, I've spent ages musing over these things because you also get mixtures of X's and K's sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So XK, but generally that just means, well, it's what the London brewers before they went over to 3Ks, what they'd have
Mm-hmm.
is 3X's and a K at the end, and then they went over to just using Ks.
Okay.
Uh, but
Okay.
there's a whole load of different ones that you get, like AK, AKK,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
KA as well. I've seen. Um, yeah, I'm not completely sure what they all mean, but yeah,
It exists.
yeah, it's good fun looking through them all. Well, no,
Mm-hmm.
AK was the one that I was particularly interested in because if you see that castle behind me,
Uh-huh. Yeah. 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 I did. I do.
that's
I
the
do.
castle in the town I grew up, and so one of the
Okay.
brewers there, Holes, and that was their trademark. Um, their main bitter was a beer called AK,
Okay.
and I sort of always wondered what the hell it stood for, and what they said locally was it was the initials of the head brewer Arthur King, which is complete bollocks. That's really not true, because there were loads of other breweries that brewed beers called AK.
Mm-hmm.
So the best I could work out is A is the strength, so A is one below X,
Okay.
and K just tells you it's a bitter.
So it's kind of a moderate strength bitter
So that means a
beer.
low strength bitter. So I mean, AK would sell for the same price as mild as the base level mild ale.
Okay.
So 36 shillings for a 36-gallon barrel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But whereas the mild would be about 10.50, the AK would be 10.45.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd
Mm-hmm.
be 0.5% ABV weaker,
Wow. It's
but
pretty
would sell for the
interesting.
same. But would sell for the same price
Mm-hmm.
because
But sorry, please.
pale ale sold at a premium, so they sold at a higher price than you'd expect them to be for
Mm-hmm.
their strength.
Okay, but this nomenclature system, they are not being used nowadays, right?
Well, you still find that the older breweries, if you look in the older versions of the Good Beer Guide,
Mm-hmm.
the beers, it will give them the brewer's name, so what would be on the barrel. And so most of the milds were officially called 3X or 4X, and most of the bitters were officially called PA.
Mm. And they also stamp those letters on the barrel too, right? To differentiate them
Yeah.
from others.
I mean, this is why they have all these. They're such short things, because what it used to be, they'd be chalked on the barrel end when it was wooden barrels, and then later on you'd have a label that you'd stick on that would say what the beer was. But when you're chalking it, obviously you don't want some complicated name you're going to write on. You just want a few initials.
Right. It's pretty clever way too.
Yeah, which is why these are always very simple. All these official brew house names, they're always very simple. They're never very complicated. But this is one of the interesting. It's something I was doing recently. I came across a Fuller's price list from 1909.
Okay.
And I've got their brewing records from 1910.
Okay.
Photographs of them. So it was fun matching them up and saying, oh, which one's which, because they're not called the same names as they are, or not all called the same name. Some have got the same name, but not all of them have got the same name as they did in the brew house.
Okay. So
and also, interestingly, why I'd come across this was because I was searching for brown ale in the newspaper archive.
No.
And this is really interesting because this was also the first time I got a brown ale brewing record from before World War One, because they were selling a beer as brown ale, Fuller's, a bottled beer. And the only thing it can be is their mild ale, because there's nothing else that fits the bill. And they're also selling their mild in two forms. One they were calling amber, and one they were calling brown ale. So they got a semi-dark and a dark version. And there's not different beers in the brewing record, so they were just coloring it up with caramel.
Okay, all right. I mean, it sounds fun.
Yeah, but it's particularly interesting when you do get situations where you've got the two things, where I've got brewing records and I've got advertisements telling me what the beers were being sold as, because it's not always obvious what they were marketing beers as. There's often quite a big disconnect between the two names. So,
right, like what's happening at the brew house and what's happening beyond the gate, how they sell it.
It's like London Pride. London Pride, initially that turns up as SPA in the Fuller's records.
Right.
It's an original name was Special Pale Ale, but it continues to be called SPA in the brewing records after the trade name had changed to London Pride. And it's only after a few years that they start calling it LP in the brewing record and not SPA.
SPA. That's cool. That's cool.
Well, if you want to know how a beer changes, I mean, it's like Fuller's Chiswick Bitter. That's the descendant of that's a direct descendant of a beer called IPA that they brewed in the 19th century that was 6.5% ABV. And it's just changed over the years and gone right down in strength. And so after the war, they reintroduced a stronger bitter, which was London Pride, which is what a lot of the London brewers did after the war. They didn't put up the strength of the bitter they've been brewing for ages. They introduced a new one that was stronger. So, this is where this is where Young Special comes from as well. From the same period.
That's cool. All right, Ron. Before we end the session, I mean, like, I would like to ask you this, probably the last question. Of all this timeline of the existence of mild, if I have to ask you to pick your favorite kind of a spot of how you think the mild would be the one that you prefer to have, can you come up with one?
Yeah, but it'd probably, for most beer styles, it'd be the same reply, actually. It'd probably be something from the Edwardian era, so very early 1900s. So something of a decent strength. So
like 5. Okay, 5.
Yeah, 5 and a bit. Yeah, something like that, and decently hopped.
Cool. That's cool. But in terms of color, is it going to be like pale, or you like a bit more?
Yeah, I like a bit more color. It's probably semi-dark.
Okay.
That'd be what it'd be.
Yeah, I mean, that's very much some of the thing. So here is the finishing line, and to close thing out, to close this session out, Rona, do you have any final say about this topic?
Well, I keep saying to people that I can't see mild ever making a comeback, but as I've been proved incredibly wrong with things like milk stout, I'm not so sure nowadays. I think it's possible that mild might have a weird recovery, if only because it's because all the old people who used to drink have now died off. It doesn't have the image of old people drinking it anymore. So maybe some youngsters that will take it up. It'd be weird if they did, but yes, stranger things have happened.
It'd be nice to see it come back, right?
Yeah, I think it'd be good, but yeah, who knows?
Right. Okay, that's excellent. And this is where we will end the session. So, Ron, thank you so much for guiding us, through the harsh story of English Mile, one of my favorite style of beer.
Okay, no problem.
All right. I mean, it's time to send you back to your day now. Thanks again, Ron. Take care.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Cheers. Here you have it. The brief story and the harsh story of English Mile. I mean, if this is the first time you've ever heard about this style of beer, then I strongly encourage and recommend you to go find some samples of it, give it a try. All right. And if you have already, know about it, then it would be great if the session can help strengthen, the passion you have for it. And lastly, and finally, I hope that the story in this session will kind of help you to better enjoy, the next pint of mile in your hand. That's all for today. The Good Burp session will be back in no time, so stay tuned. Until next time, cheers and sawadee krap.